Education reporter Esther Wickham takes a look at the increased scrutiny around the amount of taxpayer subsidies being given to non-citizen students, and she joins us now for the Center Square Daily. Esther, what are we finding out about this issue, and just how pervasive is it across the country?
Yeah, thanks, Greg. So July of last year in 2025, the Trump administration, first of all, since joining his second term, has definitely put a priority on cracking down on exactly what is America, spending its money on, what are taxpayers, getting that return on investment for how much money they're putting towards, especially in the category of education. And so we're seeing across the country now this renewed debate around, taxpayer-funded financial aid when it comes to illegal immigrant students. How much money are they getting from the federal government, and now specifically state aid going towards illegal immigrant students' education? And so over the last year, the U.S. Department of Education has kind of rolled back this decades-old policy that now requires, stricter eligibility for federally funded education programs. And so essentially this would require, verification, identity verification, so that U.S. citizens can actually get the federal education funding that they need, since for so long there hasn't been that requirement restriction. And so now we're kind of keeping tabs on what's actually going on when it comes to federal education as well as state aid. And within the reporting, since this has been rolled back, we're seeing a lot of states pop up with various programs, and the programs have been around for decades, but now they're kind of under a stricter scrutiny within the federal government, as well as state officials and education officials kind of questioning what is this money going towards, and is it actually impacting and helping U.S. citizens, or is it going towards illegal immigrant students? And from what we've seen, there are around 17 to 19 states, including Washington, D.C., that have some sort of state-funded financial aid to illegal immigrant students. And usually this is tied to residency or graduating from local high schools. So these kinds of students, are actually going to American schools and wanting to go to local community colleges or state universities, but programs, for example, like the California Dream Act application, as well as other programs we see in Colorado, Texas, New York, Illinois. These kinds of programs kind of allow students who don't have the documentation, that aren't U.S. citizens, so they're illegal immigrant students trying to get education. They don't have to apply for FAFSA. They can get these state aid financial aid to attend the university that they want, without having to go to the federal government to prove identification.
And as you said, California Dream Act, you've got the Colorado application for state financial aid, you've got the Illinois Monetary Award Program that's been expanded, New York's Dream Act, just to name a few of the upwards to 19 different states or jurisdictions with these types of programs. How much is this costing taxpayers?
Yeah, so a study by the Federation for American Immigration Reform estimated, and Greg, you got to keep in mind, this is not just undergrad or higher education. This is estimating education as a whole. Illegal immigrants a total around $5.7 billion nationally, and the largest portion of the fiscal impact are on state and local budgets. And so when you think about this study kind of on a macro scale, this is how much is going towards students that are not U.S. citizens, and you kind of think about the impact of what is that happening to taxpayers, and how is that impacting U.S. citizens and students that want to go to university and are trying to get that financial aid to be able to do that.
Esther, you talked to a couple of different people on this story on both sides, and you can kind of glean a little bit of what the debate's really about and kind of where the line is drawn in the sand for each side of this. Tell us what you found out from the Freedom Foundation.
Yeah, so I spoke with Rusty Brown. He's the director of special projects for the Freedom Foundation, and something he highlights, which I think everyone can recognize and have sympathy for this kind of situation, is it's a really complex issue. A lot of these students, these illegal immigrant students, didn't really choose to be here, didn't necessarily bring themselves over here. This is kind of a result of family or friends, and kind of put them in this situation, and they're maybe trying to do the best that they can. And he acknowledges that this is complex and it's hard to kind of deny education to children maybe trying to do the right thing. And so it's definitely a moral issue, but you also have to raise the question of, taxpayer dollars and how that's impacting American citizens. And so something he kind of emphasizes in one of his quotes, he says, if you're helping illegal immigrants, then what are you doing is cutting off funding that could be going to helping Americans' kids, and especially impoverished school districts. And there should be a focus on America first. So, you want to recognize this is a complex issue, and it's really hard to quantify every situation. And but at the end of the day, this is America. We want to focus on our school districts that are struggling financially, and the students that maybe are super smart, but they just didn't get the same opportunities as other kids. And, they were born here, they're U.S. citizens, and they kind of deserve the right to get that state aid or that federal financial aid to go to the college of their dreams. But on the flip side, had a lot of conversations with various school districts, specifically in California, the California Dream Act application, talking to the state of California. Their response is, well, undocumented students, are American students. They're taxpayers. Their parents are taxpayers. They deserve to have a seat at the table as well. And so you kind of have to figure out, okay, how much are they paying compared to U.S. citizens, to taxpayers who have been here, born and raised here, and is that quantifiable for them to have a seat at the table and have access to those state education funds as well?
And you also talked to the chief communications officer for Colorado's Department of Higher Education, giving a bit of a perspective as to a payor of this who's giving these funds and these resources to these types of students. What did they have to say?
Yeah, so in her response in an email, she kind of said, when taxpayers express concerns about how public funds are used, the higher education department refers to legislation indicating Colorado students who, graduate from high school or earn their high school equivalency, they should also be awarded state-funded financial aid. And so kind of her response in explanation is saying, look, these taxpayers may be rightly concerned about what's actually happening with the money that they're contributing through their paycheck every 2 weeks or every month. But at the end of the day, what specifically the Colorado Department of Higher Education is going to focus on is legislation. And if we're seeing these students, attend these high schools, follow the requirements, and apply through our application process, providing the necessary details that, according to the law, says they need, then they have every right to this legislation, and they have every right to this funding. And if they want to go to a state school or community college, then they have the ability to do that. And so kind of going back to that idea of, it's definitely a complex issue to try and figure out how do we quantify, like, whether we allow some people but not other people to get financial aid. But it goes back to that question of, are we valuing and prioritizing America first and America's students when it comes to this state aid, and how is that getting trumped or devalued compared to these illegal immigrant students entering the education system?
Well, $5.7 billion of taxpayer funds going to this. You can see why that's a big issue, and something that the Trump administration has an eye on, and the ongoing conversation with 50 different states on how to address this. Obviously, that's a lot more that you're going to be reporting on, Esther. Greatly appreciate you taking the time with us here for the Center Square Daily.